Good morning. This is Dave in Vegas with Sin City Custom, and I thought I would discuss with you the mainspring housing on a 1911 pistol. This is your typical flat mainspring housing. The mainspring housing contains the mainspring housing pin retainer, the mainspring cap, and it's all held together with this pin. What the mainspring does, when the pistol is cocked, it compresses that spring, and then when the trigger is pulled, the sear is released, and it causes the hammer to pivot upward, forward, to hit the firing pin. As an aside, this is the hammer. This is the hammer strut, and the hammer strut is placed or held in place in the hammer with the hammer strut pin. Now, if we had a cutaway of a mainspring housing, we could see the internal parts. So to remove the mainspring housing, we drive out this pin. You'll notice that the pin is driven in from the left side, and you'll see there's a dimple on the pin. On the opposite side, it's rounded. It goes in with the rounded end first from the left side. Normally you would have to use a punch and probably a small hammer to drive out the pin, but on this one we don't have to do that because I have a shorter mainspring in here to use to show you how this works. Now you'll see the hole here that the mainspring housing pin goes into to hold it into the receiver. What holds that pin in is the mainspring housing pin retainer. It's under spring tension, and the retainer pushes on the mainspring housing pin and keeps it in place. You'll notice that the mainspring housing pin retainer has a conical shape. As it goes to the bottom of this hole, the hole that the mainspring goes in goes through, well, not completely through, but it breaks through the mainspring housing pin hole so that the two work in conjunction like that. Now the mainspring is held in place with this pin. This is the mainspring cap pin, and we can withdraw it. Normally you have to use a small punch. You'll compress the mainspring, and you'll push that pin out with a punch, and that will release the mainspring with the mainspring cap and the mainspring housing pin retainer. Now we can get a better look at these holes. You can see how this hole intersects that hole. Contained within the mainspring housing is the mainspring housing pin retainer, which holds the pin in, which holds the mainspring housing in the gun. And there's the mainspring and the mainspring cap. Now you see there's a dimple in the mainspring cap, and the hammer strut rides in that dimple. So when you put the gun back together, when you put the mainspring housing in, you want to make sure that the hammer strut fits in that dimple, not off to the side, and certainly not behind or on top of the mainspring housing. Now when they are assembled, you take the mainspring, you put the mainspring housing pin retainer on it, put the mainspring cap on, you insert them into the mainspring housing, you compress the mainspring, insert the mainspring cap pin, keep it in view for you, and that's what the inside of the mainspring housing looks like. And then when you install it into the pistol, you'll line up the holes, insert the pin, and drive it in.